All right, so our 3-on-3 panel, and today we're going to be discussing on vacant land and land development. This is going to be the July panel that we're going over. So I just wanted to do a brief introduction to everyone here. So my name is Ryan Prichard with Prichard Properties in Keller Williams, Rivertown out of Granville, and then we'll kick it over to Steve if you'd like to introduce yourself as well.
Steve Hanson, Hanson Real Estate Group.
Brian Huffman, Remax United.
Yeah, and Randy Reed's Realty.
Perfect. So we're wanting to do some education around vacant land, buildable land, and just working with clients that are, both purchasing but also listing land on how we're working with them, especially with the hot topic that we have right now around just things being verifying who you're working with, right? So we've had a lot of scams around working with our clients. So just before we kick that off, as just a little bit of educational content for the association, before you even start working with some, how are you vetting people before you jump in and working with someone, if anyone does that?
I don't think quite often when we get a call, it's you either know them through a third party, it's a referral. Mm-hmm. It's pretty easy if they call and say, I've got, say, 60 acres here, to pull it up on Access Kent and see that they are the owner. That's, I've never had a red flag. Usually that's what I do, and,
I think there's just been a few other instances that we've heard of where someone's like masked the phone call by being another number, calling in, and then sending electronic documents. So I think quite often from the land side, I've been meeting clients out there, seeing them on property, meeting through another verified source or lender's source. So, but something good to, as a reminder for our industry, to verify who we're working with. So, but past that, jumping in, Steve, I'm going to have you kick it off with the first question here. So, when helping buyers, how should you ensure you're doing your due diligence to determine if this land is actually buildable for your clients?
Well, if the land's already split, it's pretty much perk test. Make sure that it's, you can get a septic system on there, and then occasionally we'll look at well logs if it's questionable.
Sure.
But if someone calls on a parcel, that's the first question: does it perk?
Okay.
Doesn't perk? Set up a perk test.
For those agents that don't know what a perk test is, can someone explain what a perk test actually is, or how you go about getting that?
Perk test is you need to have certain soils in order to get a septic system. It has to be able to drain. So, and there's different types of septic systems. If it's say heavier clay, you may do what's called a mound system, which is more expensive. The least expensive system is a conventional system. Then you go in between that, deep cut systems. But typically you're going to call the county, do a soil evaluation. You fill out a form. It's $100, $200. And these days, correct me if I'm wrong, but usually you got to have an excavator out there to meet them. Used to be back in the day, you could do a hand bore and take care of it. But now, I just tell people expect $1,000 to $1,500 max,
Perfect.
Depending on how many you have to do. But that's what you do.
Cool. Now, Brian, Randy, is there any additional due diligence beyond that we should be looking into for our clients? That's obviously we need to have those for our buildable sites.
Yeah, I think there's quite a few things you need to kind of look at as far as due diligence, understanding what your buyer's looking for. I spent a lot of time as a builder too, so I always try to get people to understand kind of what does that first square foot cost you to build, and that's all the government fees, permits. Every land is going to be a little bit different, and you may have a traditional septic system like Steve mentioned that's $10 grand, and I put one in a couple years ago that was $35 grand. So for that client who had a 5-acre parcel in Forest Hills, premium location, that was okay. There's vacant land that we're looking at that's listed for 35, and if they have a septic that's going to cost them that much, that's a deal breaker for that parcel. So kind of understanding what does it cost to start constructing a house is something I try to advise people to understand.
Great.
And every parcel is a little bit different.
That's good.
Yeah. Really a combination of what Brian and Steve were saying as far as the perk. There are, again, different styles of drain fields. And I'll tell you, I'd always recommend that they use the vacant land purchase agreement.
Okay.
The real estate board has a very good, I get constantly purchase agreements on the regular residential side of things, and it just doesn't thoroughly cover what needs to be done. there's obviously a due diligence time frame in here for us agents to go ahead and usually put in, okay, closing, if you will, 30 days, and long and short, you have 14 of those days to do all your background, all the due diligence, confirm zoning, confirm that it's buildable. And if you do write up the purchase agreement, I recommend you go ahead and write it up contingent upon the seller providing the buyer with a perk test that is acceptable to the buyer.
Perfect.
One of the reasons for that is exactly what Brian was saying. Goodness, I'm expecting a $10,000 or $12,000 drain field, and now they need a pressurized sand filtration system for $35,000 or $40,000. Huge difference. But of course, if you simply wrote it up contingent upon the seller providing you with a perk test, well, you got your perk test. It's acceptable, isn't it? Okay, but there's quite a variance in that. Okay, as far as the buyer side of things, for getting them covered, you just want to make sure that they are, I guess that they are getting what they're expecting to get, and they aren't getting into an expensive situation that they aren't planning on. And again, if it is an expensive situation, totally great if they know it. And some properties warrant a nice, piece of property. Okay, yeah, I'll put the extra in a drain field because now I can build there. But you want to be careful for your buyer that they're not getting into something that's.
I think something very key that you said there, when we started doing vacant land, representing our clients on those, that difference between residential houses inspections and land inspections, right? You said 30 days. What are you usually advising to make sure that your clients are getting enough inspection time? What is that normal window? What's suitable for you?
30 days for land is,
Very
counties,
normal.
And you can always check with the county depending, and say, how far are you guys out? Usually it's a couple weeks.
Yeah.
Every once in a while they're jammed up, but like these days they're a couple weeks out.
That's good.
Yeah.
And then I think that is actually a really good tee up for the next question too. So are there special considerations for buildable land or land that's in a development when you're working with your client? So an already developed land, or like, okay, this is a split off piece of parcel. Maybe it's gone through some evaluation, maybe it hasn't. What are you considering the differences are, or how are you representing those clients as well?
Well, say someone's looking at a piece of land and they want to do splits. I mean, the first thing I always look at is what's the minimum amount of acreage in that municipality? What's the minimum amount of frontage? Then how much? Based on that, you can figure out about how many lots you can get out of there. And then really what you're looking at is, okay, can you get splits without having to put a road in? Can you do statutory splits or splits by right, meaning you don't have to go through the approval process, basically an application. So how many splits can you get based on frontage and, minimum amount of acreage? As far as actual development, if you're looking at, say, condos or single family, then you're also looking at it like, if we put a road in, what's it going to cost for that? I mean, you just do a general estimate. If we put this road in, how many splits can we get off the road? And also, how many can we get off of, say, the main street if there's enough frontage? So maybe you get enough lots off that main street to pay for the street. So those are the kind of things you're going back and forth with to see what you can put a value together for the land, whether you're representing the buyer or the seller. Just to determine value.
Well, which I really like. What you said, they're representing buyer or seller. So let's say that you were going to list someone's property for sale and you want to market it to the best. Do you also provide an analysis of what this land could be used for as options to say, hey, you should list at X price and we should market it this way?
We had one come in yesterday that's on a lake, and they have a lot next door with an outbuilding, another vacant lot, and another 9 acres. And they were, how do we get the most out of it? So we're looking at it right now, and we're looking at, okay, what are the setbacks for that one with the building? Can you put a little house on that one with the building, or will that particular lot perk? So instead of just selling a lot on the water with an outbuilding, can you actually live on it? So it'll bring value. And we're looking at the other lot, and the recommendation is get that other lot perked. If it perks, sell the house and sell everything, split it up.
Sure.
So we're going through that process right now to say, instead of selling this for $450,000, you can sell the house for still $450,000. You can sell the building for X. You can sell that vacant lot for $200,000, that kind of thing. So you're just sort of breaking it down.
You're doing that to maximize the amount that the seller gets, obviously, but it also helps you as far as a commission perspective.
Yeah,
you might as well get as much out of that property for them as you can, because it helps you as well.
True, that's good.
And you're very right as far as you need to see what they'll allow municipality-wise to be done on that property. There are some areas that they have, agricultural exemptions, preservation districts, Alpine Township, that, you just, simply cannot do much with that. And a 20-acre piece a little bit ago was a building site for simply one house. That's all that they'd permit on that. And if there's other ones that, we just put in a little small subdivision of 8 properties, 8 lots, that was on 37 acres, but it just warranted that. And again, that ended up being side hill cuts. It was solid clay. But okay, what do you do with solid clay? Well, they allow a side hill cut in Ottawa County, which again allows for a drain field. Now you have a buildable site that otherwise they would just say, nope, doesn't perk. Okay, so it does pay to investigate and look into a little deeper on some of these that you can't easily necessarily split. And some areas will allow shared private driveways, which allow you to get 2 lots out of instead of 1 in an area. And that makes a big difference too when you're, divvying up land. But if you know what can be done with the land, then you know what the value is. And otherwise, you're just kind of speculating. And obviously, you want to know and to help your customer
Maximize it.
maximize it.
Yeah. I think you need to really maximize that value, you need to talk to your customer about the time frame for different projects, because if it's entitled to this number of splits, in theory, you can have an engineer and a surveyor out and you can get that done relatively quickly and get that property to the market. If they, are some looking at township zonings and they see that, well, it's zoned for this and they're starting to do math, you need to talk through and help them understand that, okay, that's going to be a much longer process to get it through there. You're going to have to invest some money to have not just a surveyor, but probably an engineer. Starts to get a lot more complex, and your value will go up, but they need to, that could be a very long process for them. So
You need
everybody's
to set those
different.
expectations up front that it could take longer, could cost more. We did one a couple years ago where I got the assessor to approve the splits and a couple shared drives, good to go. She left, and about 2 weeks later, the new assessor came in and said, nope, what she said was wrong. And so I had to start all over again, redraw it, do the whole thing, and instead of 6 months, it took a year. And they weren't happy, even though I told them this could go on, because we had an approval in writing. But you can't really go after City Hall, so to speak. So you had to deal with it. But in the end, they did good. But we had lots pre-sold, but they were all contingent on seller's approval of township's approval. So we ended up actually raising the price of the lots and delaying it, and everybody still bought, and it worked out. But you can run into some crazy stuff, so you need contingencies.
Those are very important distinguishation, or how you distinguish like the parceling of land, splitting the land, finding that you can just go through a simple permit process, split off land because you're going by what's already municipally approved. But otherwise, there are circumstances. Yeah, the acreage is large enough, you can develop this, but then we're going to be bringing in, a developer, we're going to be bringing in an engineer, they're going to bring in a surveyor, right? Because we might be doing something that's non-conforming at that point. But
And you have the county, the county on...
And what are the availability of utilities in the area, natural gas or not, underground electric, are they going to make you put that or overhead? And that changes the cost, cable TV, that's a biggie right now.
Not that this is on the question, but it makes me think, do you ever give like a baseline cost per square foot if you are on well septic propane versus being on public utilities when advising clients?
I usually do a pro forma with a 25% contingency in it.
That's good to know.
And it's an estimate with a big fat contingency, because you can blow through that 20%, 25. So again, it's setting the expectations that this is a start, but this can go different directions as we go along, especially if you get the county involved.
I'd be very nervous about just throwing a number out for any of those things, because there's just dozens of different things that can pop up and steer you one direction or another. You don't know what they are until you start to dive into it.
And you really don't. Until you're down the roadways, you have no idea really what you're getting into. So that things can change tremendously in a hurry on developing land of that nature. So a thought for people is getting a delay of listing actually signed. Okay. You know what? You can put $3 million on the thing, but at least you have it tied up for you, and you spend the next literally year getting things psyched out to do the subdivision. And then it's worth it because you're not going to have a problem later on. More so, they know that you are committed.
True.
And they are committed to you, in writing legally. And at that point, then it's less likely that they're going to have you do a huge amount of work and then decide to sell it themselves or decide to sell it through some other broker just because some family member got in the business that is now.
Those are good tricks of the trade,
them,
actually.
So it would
Yeah.
be really good advice to get, something in writing if you're going to do a larger project like that.
That's good. I love it. So another question here is, what factors need to be considered in the purchase of vacant land that differs for agents that have specialized like in the condo single-family home purchase? What considerations should they put in that purchase agreement of like the vacant land? And maybe you can kick this one off, Brian.
Sure. Well, I think, as Randy mentioned, using the land purchase agreement is going to help highlight some of those issues. But I think the biggest difference is it fundamentally comes down to when you're buying a house or a condo, the land is there, it's established. You're worried about the structure and what could go wrong with that structure that they're investing the money in. With the land, it's what could go wrong with the land or what could prevent me from building the land as I see that I want to. I mean, are there wetlands involved? Is it an old orchard that maybe has some arsenic in the soil? It's what is there already that may prevent you from doing something, or what's going to cost you a lot more money to accomplish what you want to build there.
Can I tee you up on one additional question there? Let's say that those are there. Would an environmental study be your next suggestion?
Yeah, I would absolutely recommend that, if there's something that, so there's wetlands, which you can talk to one consultant about that, and then environmental concerns, you may need to do a phase one, where they just look at the title and understand if there was ever anything that could have caused contamination, and then maybe you have to step into a phase two or phase three that's going to dive into more, and you may have to actually start, I had a project in the north side where we had to truck out soil and dump it took it to the dump, and because it had arsenic from an apple orchard.
Wow.
So fortunately it was a big enough project that it could absorb that across all the different lots, but it's important to understand because you don't want to set anybody up to be liable for something
Yep, makes sense.
responsible long term.
What you were mentioning about a wetland delineation, it can factor in pretty significantly because we've got a piece on the Grand River right now that literally 80% of it is floodplain. Okay, well, we had to have at least a 1 acre area because it's so much floodplain out of the 100-year floodplain to get a septic permit from Ottawa County.
Sure.
Okay. And, it was like a very fine line. We were able to get it, but a very, very fine line because we could have very easily been non-buildable. And, now we have a buildable site. I'm helping the seller in that particular case versus the buyer. But you need to have all that stuff down packed before you list it. There's some agents that will simply list a piece of property and they don't do a perk test. They don't do their due diligence. So you need to step in and make darn sure that your buyer's covered on all those types of things. Because the last thing on earth you want to do is sell them a piece of property they can't build a home on.
Yep,
It causes problems.
It causes problems. Yep.
that's great.
That's right.
Well, that's really the educational piece that we wanted to cover today. Now, thinking on these past client experiences or anything like that, is there any tricks of the trade, anything else that we should tell the association about that you've operated on before?
I think the tricks, people would have to pay for the tricks.
There you go. Yeah.
I think one word of advice, I've got a piece of property listed on the northern side of the county now, and I talked to the planner and the assessor, and they're like, man, we're getting a lot of calls. I'm like, well, that's great. Yeah, but nobody seems to know anything when they call me. So if you're looking at land for your clients, at the very least, look at the zoning, look at that stuff if you have questions before. Try to call those people with some educated questions where you've looked at it, or even if it's brand new, to just say, hey, I've looked at this online. Is this I see a plan dated from 1992. Is that the latest one? It may or may not be. They're going to be much more receptive to helping you answer those questions if you've done a little bit of homework. And as you get into the city of Grand Rapids, it gets even more complicated with zoning districts that are overlaid on top of other things. But start looking at some of that stuff before you make the calls, because it makes it a lot easier on all the other agents when we go in where they don't just think, one more real estate agent who wants me to do the homework for them.
Yep. Great.
And most all that stuff is online nowadays with all the townships for sure, and most of even the cities and villages, Sparta, everything's online nowadays. So you can look it up pretty easily, pretty quick.
That's great.
Like you say, the master plan versus the original zoning makes a difference too. Every 5 years they need to do a new master plan for the area. So you want to make sure. We had one just a little bit ago that it was zoned residential, and they ended up changing it to a commercial situation as in the master plan. Well, that had a huge impact on financially what could be done with that land.
Yeah.
So great. I think these are all great takeaways. Thanks everyone for being here today and being willing to share your
Thank you for being
experience.
here.
Yeah. But I love what you guys said about the purchase agreement contracts that we have here as well, and the listing contracts they hear. So obviously the association works very hard on those with our legal team, and I think that they're well prepared for all of us. So if there's questions on those, I think that the association has done very well as well. So thanks everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.